Taiwan is attacked heavily by China. The United States is attacked heavily by China. We ought to be working for common solutions. Taiwan can be a part of that solution. Economic competitiveness, another area where there should be common solutions. You may be smarter than I dare say that's a good bet. And there are other areas where we should be giving positive solutions for leaders in Taiwan and leaders in the United States to pursue, to put the relationship on a more positive trajectory. Those are just a few of the areas, but there's no substitute for familiarity. And so bringing meaningful Americans to your next generation of leaders and allowing Americans to basically get to know these people and become comfortable with them is important.
Any other question from the floor? If not, I will have one question for you. Okay. How do you interpret the three communiques and TRA? Any conflict or how do you stand on United States policy viewpoint and you address it? Thank you.
Okay. Well, this is another area where I think most of America, outside of the State Department and outside of Washington, probably would have no idea what we were talking about. Because to average folks, communique doesn't enter normal discourse. I don't go through my business day talking about the communiques that are going to be signed or issued or things that will govern my life. But when it comes to policy towards China, everything must have a number and it must be permanent. And so for China, there are 3 joint communiques. I don't know why there are 3. It's probably because number 4 would sound like death, and no one wants to have a 4th communique because it would sound like death. But so we have 3 joint communiques: 1972, 1979, and 1982. Now, I ask you, how many of you think the world of 1972, 1979, and 1982 has any relevance whatsoever to the U.S.-China-Taiwan reality of 2012. Leaders of even in 1982 couldn't possibly have fathomed what reality would be in Taiwan. Think of what Taiwan was like in 1982. In the 1980s, I would walk through a neighborhood and I would hear clanking noises of factory machinery operating in people's living rooms because they were putting snaps on the fabric or sewing shoes together. There were actual factories operating in hundreds of thousands of households in Taiwan. Not in 2012. When I lived in the town of Xining in the 1980s, no building was taller than 5 stories because if it was taller than that, then regulation required an elevator to be installed. And landlords did not want to have the expense of installing an elevator. And so there was no building taller than 6 stories. You go to Xining today, there's almost no building shorter than 6 stories. Taiwan is completely different. China is completely different. And America is completely different. The world is completely different. I just don't believe that government bureaucrats in a world lost in time could possibly have something that should bind how we deal and define our relations today. I just think that the communiques are essentially dead. But our diplomats continue to refer to them as being our policy. Again, I think this is an area where all of you and we together have an opportunity. Challenge ordinary Americans to read those documents and then tell you, after having read those, what is our policy? They don't make any sense when you read them yourself. You won't be able to know what we do. Taiwan Relations Act is somewhat different. I still believe that a lot of what they define in the Taiwan Relations Act can't possibly take into account the world we live in today. But the difference between a communique and a law is a communique is a polite letter agreed upon by parties, has no enforcement, almost no detail. Law is law. And when the law happens to be a declaration on policy, it should have more force, more durability. Personally, I think that there should be an update to the Taiwan Relations Act. Personally, I think there should be a new Taiwan Relations Act. I am in the minority of this view. There are key things in the Taiwan Relations Act that are important, powerful, but there are also key parts of the Taiwan Relations Act that have been violated. There is no part of the Taiwan Relations Act that says that the United States will not support Taiwan to be a member of international organizations where statehood is required. That came by an interagency meeting among low-level bureaucrats in 1992 through 1994. That's not in the Communiques, not in the Taiwan Relations Act. So much of American policy today is just made up. It's not in those documents, but our diplomats will defend them with the mention to these important documents. Personally, I think we need to have a debate about a new policy towards China. I think that there is perhaps bipartisan interest in reopening some of the key assumptions about how the United States deals with China. And I think that we need to have a new policy for Taiwan, one that takes into account, 1982, martial law was still real. How many elections were there in Taiwan of any consequence at that time? It's just a fundamentally different environment. We talk about selling Taiwan arms of a defensive nature based solely on Taiwan's defense needs. That's a complete lie. No one can say that America has sold Taiwan defensive articles sufficient to its self-defense needs. In fact, we are currently in an era where we specifically deny weapons sales to our allies, be they Japan, Australia, Taiwan, etc. And so I think that we have allowed these to sit on the shelf too long, and we probably need more activism to get a serious refresher for what American policy should be toward these two areas in the current era.
Okay, I think that will wrap up the speech, and we really appreciate that Steve gave us so advanced and detailed analysis to cover the future of Taiwan and the security of Taiwan. Also, he mentioned a lot of things to China and also the United States. So let's give Steve a big hand. Really, really good. Steve. With a small token for you, and we need Frank Ho, the president, come over here. And there's a plaque, and the plaque shows under Steve's name, we say that Steve make a speech here, talk about the topic of Taiwan security. And everyone aware of Steve's name being sounder and well known in Taiwan, United States, and even China. So the friends here gathering in Bay Area, and we listen to Steve's speech, and we believe that democracy and fair and justice, liberty and justice should be covered over the world. So in Mandarin, we put this 望辉政论, and the bottom we say 台湾安全，望民威震美中台，非有这个叶望辉的辉，非有引领巨金湾，正义凛然社稷安，论据民主普世权。
下一个节目是宜兴节目跟那个抽奖。Still one more. Sorry. 要买的赶快找我们那个卖彩票的小姐，然后我们就把所有的彩票放到抽奖箱。因为大家都听了常的演讲，所以我们想先抽几个奖，让大家 relax 一下，然后我们再来离心节目。今天节目很精彩，有日本。